Maybe you guys can share with me how do y'all find the script? I did not give y'all any tips or whatsoever. Bring your faces here. No need to be captured. Maybe you can chat. You can type out on the chat. How do y'all find the paper? B is hard. Only B. Okay. What else? Little hard. A little hard. Alright. B is hard. Little hard. Right. Okay. So let's see how things goes here. Okay. So the question is about economic priorities. Okay. So what kind of priorities are we looking out for? Okay, we're looking out for macro objectives, right? Okay. Macro objectives. So this is the first thing that you want to be concerned about. Okay, we'll be looking out for the few macro objectives, okay, in the extract. Okay, so the very first thing that I often tell my students to look at is the question first. Okay, you need to have the end in mind before you decide, okay, what to look out from the extract. So having said that, let's quickly zoom into the question itself. Okay, so for A1, we have an economic relationship based question. So for such question, okay, pay attention to how the question is phrased. So for relationship based question, I'm looking out for specifically either of this. They're related by goods in nature, or they're related by variables. So it's quite obvious that labor productivity and economic growth, okay, they are related by variables. So I'm specifically looking out for these two words. They are either directly or positively related. If not, they are negatively or inversely related, right? So if they're related by good, they are only related by these few cases, right? So they are either joint in demand, competitive in demand, joint in supply, competitive in supply, or derived demand. In this case, this is not required, okay? So don't identify the wrong thing. Okay, A part 2, you're supposed to explain either the direct or the inverse relationship that they observe in South Korea. So for question B, some of you all mentioned that question B is hard. Okay, so you can actually see that the question is asking, okay, explain the case of the use of regulation by UK government to manage huge capital flood. So is this question testing us about what kind of regulation? Okay, or is this question testing us on why is there a need to regulate for when the country experiences huge capital flood? So if we were to paraphrase this question is obviously not about how or the usage of regulation, but why the need to regulate. So you need to look out specifically for the extract that mentions about the undesirable part about huge capital flood. So the very first thing that we need to relate to is what happens when capital comes in. Okay, so this concept is closely related to your exchange rate determination. So for some of y'all, I have covered with you guys before. Okay, when there's excessive capital coming in, okay, this will lead to a higher demand for your currency, which exerts an upward pressure on the exchange rate. Right, so you want to find out, okay, what are some of the undesirable part, okay, when there is excessive appreciation in your exchange rate. How is it undesirable for the UK economy? That's one thing that you want to look out for. If not, okay, look out for the first extract, okay, and look out for any particularly undesirable cause of excessive capital coming in. Right, so C1, relatively straightforward. Okay, one similarity and one difference, keyword compare. C2, okay, explain the impact of both the short run and long run of the above situation, which is your youth unemployment, okay, in Greece or UK. So realize that the entire extract, Okay, there's only one table that illustrates the unemployment rate. Okay, after that, there will be no mentioning about unemployment, okay, for Greece or UK. So in this case, okay, you're supposed to identify yourself. Okay, so in this case, youth unemployment, okay, is likely to be what? Undesirable. So if we were to pair impact and countries together, I have mentioned this before. Okay, this combination is likely to result in what? Okay, macro problems. Okay, or rather, you can use the cost approach. What is the cost? Okay, so let me repeat. Okay, we're not actually looking at the macro problem is actually stated. So sorry. Okay, we're looking specifically at the cost of unemployment. COST, yeah. Okay, so specifically the cost. Okay, we are looking at the cost of unemployment to an economy. So where can we actually get this? If you refer to your economics in minutes, okay, I hope all of you all have that. Okay, if you flip to page 87, I don't know whether I can open this here. I should be able to open this here. Okay, I have a lot of things that's open here. Okay, where is my... Are y'all looking at page 87? Okay, let's scroll to page 87. Right, okay, so when you actually observe that the question is asking impact on the economy, okay, we are specifically going to zoom into, okay, the impact on the government, right? So you can bring up any of this, combine with the emphasis on youth. Okay, why is it particularly that youth being unemployed is extremely undesirable? So these two does not explain youth. Okay, so these two, they only explain the overall cost of unemployment. Okay, you have to focus your point on youth as well. Okay, so I would recommend this approach. Okay, it can either be a 1-2 combination. Okay, short run, long run, like this. Or it can be a 2-1 combination, short run, long run. Okay, so long as there is a reason approach or a reason reason approach to split it into 3 points, right? So make sure you write it based on per point, okay, not your length. Your length doesn't matter here. It's the point that you illustrate. So question D is actually pretty fun. Okay, the extract actually asks you, it suggests, extract 9 suggests that much of the rise in living standard is due to innovation. Right? So discuss the validity of this argument. So there are 3 pitfalls here. Okay, so the first pitfall, okay, is number 1, you need to look out for the question much. Or you have to read the phrasing together, much of the rise. So if you were to construct this into thesis and antithesis, okay, this is obviously a thesis antithesis question. Validity tells you that. So your thesis will tell you that much of the rise in living standards is due to innovation. Your antithesis will tell you that much of the rise in living standards is not due to innovation. So the keyword here, much, is important. Why? Because if you omit much, okay, then you will realize that you will be trapped in some form of weird argument. Okay, rise in your living standard is not due to innovation. Then you start to critique about the limitation of innovation. Okay, which is not the point. Okay, so the keyword here, much, actually tells you that you have to identify one other alternative. Okay, one other alternative excluding innovation. Okay, that tells you that your living standards is going to be improved other than innovation. So yesterday it was actually brought up, okay. So unfortunately, if you don't read the question carefully, you will not be able to craft out with the antithesis correctly, right? So the next pitfall that you need to look out for is innovation. So later on, we'll need to look at the extract, okay, to try to decipher what meaning do we want to attach to innovation. Right? Okay, so make sure you are able to split up to material, standard of living, and non-material standard of living. Okay, and we will try to find from the extract how can innovation actually promote these two. Okay, and an alternative that can also promote these two as well. Right, the last pitfall, okay, I will cover this, okay, in the actual write-up, okay, on the exam or the answer breakdown itself. So the last question, okay, is probably the trickiest question. Okay, this was actually brought up, okay, in all the earlier classes. So you can actually see that, okay, an important lesson from the severity of recent world financial crisis is that blah blah blah. Okay, this is actually from extract 6. So if you were to zoom into extract 6, what does it tell us? Okay, it tells us that this is a fiscal policy response. Okay, so what extract 6 is trying to tell us that, okay, counter-cyclical policy response. So what is counter-cyclical? So earlier on in this week, one of the students actually texted me, Mr Teo is counter-cyclical. So you have to know that your last week, I think I covered this, right, under unemployment, right? Cyclical unemployment goes through business cycle, right? Okay, so you realize that when the economy is going through a downturn, oops. Sorry, something wrong with my pen. Okay, if the economy is going through a downturn, so the policy response has to go in reverse. Okay, it has to go counter-cyclical. So it simply tells you that the government can probably change another colored pen. Okay, what should happen to your government spending? Okay, it should go up. So likewise, if you realize that the economy is going through, okay, a recovery or boom, then it tells you that the government should reduce spending. So the orange arrow actually tracks, okay, the counter effect, okay, of what the government should do. In this case, it's fiscal policy. So if you were to put things into perspective, we realize what? Okay, it tells you that, okay, when the economy is recovering during upswings, okay, you should be more prudent about spending. Okay, you should in fact consider cutting your spending in order to prevent demand pull inflation. Okay, and from here, okay, you are able to build greater safety measures, safety margins in order to react to large adverse shocks. So you realize that when in a downturn or what we so-called a large adverse shock, okay, the government, okay, because of previous savings that they accumulated, previous prudency that they adopted, they are able to spend. Okay, but if they anyhow spend during recovery, it is what we call non-prudency, then they will not be able to contain the adverse shocks, okay, when it comes. So in a nutshell, we are looking at setting aside what? Setting aside for the rainy days. Okay, so this extract also tells you that the reaction from the government is also constrained by the existing debt level and budget deficit. Okay, so if the country, especially if the country is a developing country, for instance, if they have overspent, okay, then you realize that they are going to face, they'll be severely constrained, okay, when they want to correct adverse shocks, especially demand shocks. So the last question, you actually see that the preamble is actually planted for a specific reason. Okay, so before we dive into the specific reason, you need to uncover, number one, what are economic priorities? Okay, what is the significance of economic priorities? Number two, how is the adjustment process being conducted? So there are two parts here. Okay, so listen carefully. Number one, what are the economic priorities aside from youth unemployment? Youth unemployment is given in the thesis. Okay, so the antithesis, okay, when you construct, this is a clearly thesis and antithesis question. You need to look out for other economic priorities. Next, the adjustment part, okay, is got to be brief. You got to illustrate how does the government adjust towards specific priorities. So let us quickly look at what are the priorities first. Okay, it wasn't specifically mentioned in the extract. Okay, so we have what? Price stability. Okay, low unemployment. So you realize that in this case, low unemployment and youth unemployment falls under the subset of low unemployment. Okay, we have economic growth. Okay, and for H2 students, we have balance of payment. Okay, but today we won't be covering balance of payment. Okay, because you realize that there's nothing related to balance of payment in this extract. So your role is to uncover what other priorities are there in the extract as compared to youth unemployment. So to realize that, okay, the position of the case material here or the preamble does suggest to you that this is a priority, right? Exercising fiscal prudency, okay, or managing your budget constraint is a priority. So I often tell my students there will be 4 macro goals and 2 side goals. Okay, 2 side goals means what? Means they are not that important. But in this case, we will see its importance. The 2 side goals will be standard of living, okay, and your budget position. So in this case, budget position fits nicely here. Okay, because the level of your budget position affects your response, okay, for future adverse shocks. Is everyone following me? Okay, so the priority, the alternate priorities that you need to uncover or you need to construct later, okay, one of them has to be a budget position. Okay, are there any other priorities that we need to be concerned about that UK may not be adjusted in response to growing youth unemployment? If you realize the empty thesis, flip this, okay, UK's economic priorities may not be adjusted, okay, in response to growing youth unemployment. Okay, it must be because there's a more pressing problem, right? Okay, and what is the more pressing problem? Okay, your role is to find out what are the other issues that were hidden in the extract. Okay, so this question, the phrasing itself, some of the students complain very weird. Okay, but if we were to break it down properly, okay, it is not weird at all. Okay, systematically, first step, we need to look at what are the priorities on top of youth unemployment. The second step is the adjustment process. Okay, if youth unemployment is the concern, how can we adjust towards that? If youth unemployment is not the concern, we need to identify what are the other priorities and how can we address. For instance, how do we achieve a healthier budget position? Right? So now let's quickly look at the question together. I'm so sorry today I'm not able to involve the both of you. Okay, both of you can just copy down notes. Okay, anything else you can ask me at the end of the question, at the end of the session. Right? So for question B, some of you mentioned that it was tough. Right? So we need to identify specifically what is undesirable about capital flood coming in. Right? So number 1, you can see that there is a repeated pattern of boom bust financial crisis. Okay, because of what? Excessive capital flood. Okay, and when the end of capital flood would be capital flight. Okay, so when there's excessive inflow and outflow, okay, this is potentially destabilizing for the economy. So you want to relate this to a problem later. Right? So, remember just now I was mentioning that UK is facing another problem. Okay, you may want to look at this. Okay, so this is the catch to identifying UK's second problem. Okay, you can see that the cost of oil and other raw materials. I hope you guys have listed this okay, in your last question. You got to identify the economic priorities cannot be entirely centric around youth unemployment. Why? Because there's other problem like this. Right? So we need to uncover what is this problem and how the adjustment process can be adopted. So for the South Korea extract, it's quite weird. Okay, I didn't manage to use anything from the South Korea extract. So if you guys have used something, let me know. Okay, and we have your key economic indicators here. So the last extract is actually the most interesting part. So we need to find from the extract what are some of, what does innovation mean? Alright, so you realize that innovation performance, okay, is a crucial determinant of competitiveness. So we can actually decipher that, okay, with innovation, okay, this actually results in competitiveness. Right? So later on, okay, we will uncover what do we mean by competitiveness. So specifically, when we talk about competitiveness, competitiveness means what? Okay, you are competing with somebody else. Okay, and therefore, okay, you always have to take perspective. Okay, who is going to compete against who? So in this case, we are concerned about your export competitiveness. So what does innovation mean? Does it mean that we can produce a new good? Does it mean that we have a new idea? Okay, or does it mean that we can produce goods at a cheaper cost? Okay, so later on, okay, we will actually look at what is the role of productivity here. So there, I just want to point out a lot of students, okay, actually raise productivity as the second point. Okay, so this is another pitfall. Okay, for question D. Your antithesis, okay, you should steer clear from productivity. Why? Because the extract already suggests, okay, that innovation, okay, despite the importance of innovation, many OECD countries still face difficulties in strengthening this area. Okay, and therefore they see little improvement in their productivity. So we can actually relate, okay, innovation could also be a result of producing a good at a lower cost. Okay, so these 2 points are stacked. They are the same point. Don't bring them up together. Okay, especially under the antithesis here. Okay, I hope none of y'all managed to if none of y'all managed to bring it as antithesis. Alright, okay, so now prepare your your green pen. Okay, we will do a quick correction. Yeah, I will do the marking, so make sure you submit by the end of the day. Right, so the first mark is a giveaway. Positively related or directly related. There's no other relationship. Right? Okay, the next part we are supposed to explain the positive relationship. Okay, so how does labor productivity results in economic growth? Okay, how are they positively related? So there are 2 approaches. Okay, you can consider either of this. So the first one, okay, that most students use is actually the ADES framework. So there's a reason definition for labor productivity. Okay, so I'm quite lax with how you define labor productivity. Okay, but it must relate to your second point. Okay, so you have to use the correct lingo. So this will lead to an increase in your LRAS and potential growth. Okay, so you realize that when your LRAS shifts out, it will cut your AD on the right hand side, okay, leading to a higher real national income. Okay, so by far this is the more popular choice. Okay, so I haven't seen many students reflecting this. Okay, you can use the PPC approach. You can talk about another reason attempt to define what is labor productivity and how this results in outward shift in your PPC and higher level of production. So the catch is outward shift. So you realize that these 2 perspectives, they are pretty much they are referring to the same thing, just that one is taking the perspective of micro, the other is taking the perspective of macro. Right, next. Okay, so for question B, okay, so just now we have actually looked at this question. We have actually tried to deduce what's the question trying to ask. So one of the key things, if you don't understand the question, you've got to try to paraphrase. Can try to find what the question is trying to ask. So the question is asking you, why is there a concern? Okay, why is there a need to manage huge capital flood? right? So huge capital flood, okay, the very first thing that we need to be concerned about is your exchange rate. Okay, so you can see that when capital is coming in, okay, we will some of the students I've covered with you guys, some of you guys I haven't covered exchange rate determination. Okay, demand for domestic currency will go up. Okay, and this will exert upward pressure on exchange rate. So the key word here is to explain your appreciation precisely. Okay, so amount appreciation or appreciation is not good enough. Okay, because you realize that when capital is flooding in, it's coming in excessive amount. So you want to talk about concepts such as steep appreciation, okay, or overshooting. Okay, these are the two acceptable terms. Okay, a normal appreciation, I won't give mark here. Huh? And you got to explain the relevance of this, okay, in terms of how it affects your export and import. Okay, so one word to sum it up is export competitiveness. Okay, so if you were to expand this in terms of price of your foreign good in domestic currency and price of your domestic good in foreign currency, I also accept. Okay, I also accept. Next, okay, you want to be concerned about the second point, okay, a boom, bust, financial crisis. So you can see that excessive capital flood, okay, will lead to what? Okay, asset bubble. Okay, especially the word boom. Okay, so you can see that excessive capital will drive up demand for assets, causing demand pull inflation. Right, so any other points, okay, I will look through on a case-by-case basis. Okay, if not, you can check with me at the end of the session. Next. Okay, so C1 is fairly straightforward. Most of the students get this right. Okay, youth unemployment generally increase. Okay, and Greece experienced the sharpest increase out of the three. Okay, if you contrast this to Korea, South Korea also acceptable. So South Korea experienced the lowest increase out of the three. Next. Okay, so remember I was mentioning about C part 2. C part 2, okay, the concept that is tested here is cost of unemployment from the government's perspective, because the country was used here as in the extract. Okay, so later on you can actually see that some of the answers that I have flashed is awfully similar to what we see in economics in minutes. Okay, but do note that there is an extra emphasis, okay, on youth unemployment. So make sure, okay, one of your points, okay, is tailored to that. Why is especially youth unemployment undesirable? So you can see that in the short run, okay, unemployment represents what? Wastage of resources. Your resources are not fully capitalized, right? They could be used to produce other goods and services. Okay, where in the long run, you can see that from the youth perspective, okay, this is where all of you are what? Okay, are the most productive. Agreed? Okay, so if you face unemployment during your youth period, okay, this will actually hamper your skill acquisition. Okay, you will not, because you're learning fast. Okay, you can also argue from the perspective that your skill acquisition, okay, will be lost forever. If not, okay, you can also talk from the perspective of if you're because of prolonged unemployment, okay, for youth especially, okay, your erosion of your skill set may set in. Likewise, okay, if this is prolonged, you realize that this is going to what? Okay, it's going to result in an increase in welfare payment. Okay, and specifically for youths who are unemployed, they do not contribute to tax revenue. Agreed? So this will what? Okay, will worsen the budget deficit or the budget position. 1 mark each. So remember, the concept here is testing here is cost of unemployment to government, right? Don't bring in consumer, don't bring in producer's perspective. Hey, you guys are very lucky. This is my 4th time covering this really in this week. So you guys actually get all the best insights okay, in this recording. Okay, so question D is actually pretty fun, right? So earlier on, I have structured for both of you, or rather I have structured the argument earlier on. Okay, so it's a thesis, antithesis. So thesis, much of the rise in living standards is due to innovation, and you want to link innovation to how it increases your material and non-material standard of living. Your antithesis, okay, much of the rise in living standards is not due to innovation. So if it is not due to innovation, it has to be due to something else. Alright, so the emphasis is actually on the thesis part. So listen to me carefully. How do we define innovation? That is the catch. So the extract actually gave us a few hints really. So let us go back to the extract to see. Right, you can either define innovation from the perspective of competitiveness, okay, your export competitiveness, okay, or from your productivity. Okay, so these two concepts are related. I will show you in a short while, okay, how is it related. So first of all, there must be a reasoned attempt to define what is innovation. Okay, so you can actually define it in such a way that, okay, it is a process to develop a new method, idea, product, okay, or you can also insert what the extract gives you, okay, produce at a lower cost. So there's two means to this. You can either talk about something new, okay, or something at a lower cost. Are you all following me? So the next thing that we want to look at is your standard of living. How do we define SOL, material and non-material? Quite straightforward. So I'm going to toggle to a blank sheet of paper. Okay, I'm going to show you, okay, what do we mean by competitiveness here. Okay, and we are going to link it to productivity. Okay, so you can see that your competitiveness, okay, sorry, I should put it in full. As I've mentioned earlier on, okay, when we mention competitiveness, okay, primarily we are competing with other countries, right? Okay, so when we are competing with other countries, okay, the primary form of competitiveness that we are looking at, okay, is in the form of goods and services with relationship to your trading partners. Export competitiveness. So for export competitiveness, you can look into these two forms. Okay, quality competitiveness, or what we call non-price, okay, or your price competitiveness. Okay, so personally, okay, listen carefully. After looking through so many scripts, okay, qualitative or non-price is the easiest to illustrate. Okay, so why is that so? Okay, later on I'll elaborate on that. But first of all, okay, we need to look into how, okay, which aspect or what framework do we need to use here. So if we were to go back to the definition earlier on, okay, we can see that producing a new idea, new product, new method, okay, what does it tell you? It tells you that you can produce a new kind of good, right? Okay, probably a better quality good. Okay, and this is going to lead to, okay, a simple demand factor, taste and preference. It's going to, taste and preference is going to go up. This will lead to a higher demand for exports. Okay, and the ultimate channel that you want to relate to is your X minus M. It's going to go up, relating to higher AD. Okay, there's a need to use AD, okay, because you need to relate material standard of living, right? So for non-price, okay, or rather for price competitiveness is a little tricky. Okay, you need to use a little bit more things. Okay, so you realize that especially from the extract, it tells you that a new method, probably a lower cost method to produce a good. Okay, so what does it tell you? Okay, it tells you that, where's my blank piece of paper? Okay, it tells you that, okay, as a result of probably higher productivity, remember the keyword earlier on was productivity, right? Okay, because you're able to find a new method, because of breakthrough in productivity, you need to tie up everything nicely. Okay, this will lead to lower unit cost of production. Okay, a lower unit cost of production will lead to your SRAS shifting downwards. Agreed? Yes or no? Right? Okay, and you realize that with lower unit cost of production, okay, the producers enjoying cost savings, what do? They will pass off the cost savings to the economy, right? In the form of lower general price level. So as a result of a downward, okay, so you can draw like this, Okay, so there are two ways to illustrate your your AS curve if you adopt this approach. Okay, so one way is to illustrate a downward shift like this. Okay, the other way, okay, is to illustrate a down and a rightward shift like this. Okay, these two are acceptable, right? Because you realize that it's going to cut your AD, okay, at a lower price. So this is what you want to illustrate. Okay, personally, my favorite is this. This is my favorite. Okay, but if you choose this, then you'll want to illustrate that cumulatively with a fall in general price level. This leads to higher quantity demanded for consumption. Okay, and higher quantity demanded for your exports. Okay, it's a movement along your AS curve. Okay, and you will want to relate to higher real national income. Okay, you can talk about, okay, labor being a derived demand. Okay, you hire more labor to meet the increase in your production, and after that, okay, you can slowly relate to R and Y. So likewise, the increase in AD, you're also going to relate to R and Y. Okay, is everyone following me on these two approaches? Okay, I'm going to put a disclaimer. Okay, I've been researching this quite a bit. Okay, so there are some schools, okay, that actually somehow, okay, so I'm just going to put a disclaimer. This one, you use it if your school use. If not, then don't use. So right after here, okay, my personal favorite is I will stop here. I don't want to go further anymore. Okay, when there's a fall in general price level, okay, what happens is your price of your exports is going to go down. Okay, and some of the schools will assume that your PED of your exports is going to be greater than 1. Okay, and this will lead to higher export revenue and higher AD. Alright, so like I say, use it only when your school tells you that. Okay, I'm not here to tell you which one to use. Personally, I don't use this. Okay, I think the ones I've stated in blue is good enough. So ultimately, okay, your very first point is to establish how R and Y goes up. Because material standard of living, okay, is a function of your R and Y. Or R and Y is a function of your material standard of living. Yes? Okay, so now after explaining the rationale, okay, let's go into the breakdown itself. So the export competitiveness I've chose, okay, is non-price or qualitative competitiveness. So you realize that because of new innovation, this will promote, okay, an increase in demand for your goods and services. Right? So AD will shift out. Okay, and this is the 6-step framework. So your role, okay, the emphasis is on higher R and Y, higher R and Y. Okay, so most importantly, okay, if you did not use the complete K effect, I think it's not that bad. Okay, but you still need to link it back to material standard of living. So higher income, higher purchasing power, okay, will lead to material standard of living improving. You must state that. Okay, so the significance is relating the multiple increase in income here. Are you all following me? Okay, the nitty-gritty part, okay, on the 6 steps, okay, you can actually revise the answer key yourself. My role here is to construct the framework so that whenever you encounter a question like this, you can fit the steps into the framework. Having the framework is more important than having the steps. Steps are easy, you can learn it. Those are hard skill. Okay, framework, you need to think. Things that require thinking, students don't like to think. Right, so you can actually see that in extract 9, it has also mentioned that innovation has helped to address climate change, sustainable development. Okay, maybe when you develop a good or you produce a good, you can produce it at a more environmental friendly approach or theme. Right, so you can result in lesser pollution and a systematic link to non-material standard of living. In this case, health. Or any other ways that you can link it to non-material, I'll give credit on a case-by-case basis. Is everyone familiar with me on the material side and non-material? So I chose AD, okay, but it doesn't deprive you from using AS. If you use the AS approach, just stick to the page that I've used earlier on. Here, okay, either of these will work. Okay, so your role is to establish that there's an increase in R and Y, good enough. Okay, these two diagrams will show the same thing. Yes? Next. Okay, I would like to see that there's an alternative here. Okay, so the alternative, I'm going to close one eye. So long as you can tell me something that is not due to innovation, not due to productivity growth and lower unit cost of production, I will give you the mark. And that being said, alright, there is an extract that specifically favors this approach. Okay, it tells you that innovation alone, okay, cannot be used to explain for OECD countries. Okay, so you can see that one of another factor, okay, that could result in higher standard of living, okay, is what we have seen in extract 6, counter-cyclical policy measure. Okay, remember, okay, the extract is actually talking about fiscal policy, okay, and prudent usage of fiscal policy. Okay, when there is upswing, we don't spend. Okay, when there is adverse shock, then we spend, right? So the act of spending during adverse shock will lead to the same. Are you all following me? So you do not need to develop the point using the ADS framework again. So this is the good point about using the AD point the first round. Okay, then your second point, if you use extract 6, then you do not need to mention the AD effects again. Likewise, if you chose extract 6, then you also need to look at what are how can we link non-material standard of living, okay, to government expenditure, right? So you can talk about government spending on merit goods, public good, education, healthcare, so on and so forth. These will result in an improvement in your non-material standard of living. So like I say, for the counterpoint, I'm going to be quite lax, but I cannot accept productivity because it has been excluded. Right, so to build a stand, okay, we can actually see that whether innovation is the main factor that leads to living standards depends on what? What's the most important criteria? It depends on the fiscal position, right? Okay, so developing countries, okay, who does not exercise fiscal prudency, then in that case, okay, innovation alone, okay, so sorry, okay, let me repeat, loss of my train of thoughts. Okay, so you can see that, okay, for countries, okay, developed countries, okay, that are very strong in financial position, then innovation itself cannot be the sole factor, okay, because the country can still afford to spend. Okay, but the alternative also holds true. Okay, if you are a developing country, you run out of options to spend, then in this case, innovation may be your only way out for living standards to improve. All right. Okay, so I will move on to the last question. Let me have a sip of water. I'm so sorry today I exceeded. So the last question, okay, 10 marks. Make sure you have at least 2 to 3 points. So they ask you, okay, how should the economic priorities access the extent? Okay, so each of these points are broken down to 2 sub-points. Number 1, okay, to justify the priority. Why is the priority important? Number 2, address the adjustment process to achieve the priority. Right? So earlier on, I'll give you all a quick breakdown already. So I will quickly skip the outline, okay, and I will go into the question itself. So make sure you have a proper opening. Okay, you define what are economic priorities. Okay, and if you see from the preamble, you can see that there is also the concern about overspending. Okay, budget concern, or budget deficit, or budget position, or healthy budget position. Let's erase this. Healthy budget position could be also a priority. Okay, on hindsight, okay, you should include this because it's already stated in the extract. So 4 plus 1. Okay, H1 no need to use 4 You can cut away the balance of payment. Don't need to use that. Anyway, today we won't be using that. Right? So I just want you all to observe for every point there will be 2 parts. Okay, so the first part is talking about either a benefit of lowering youth unemployment or costs of rising youth unemployment. So I realize that this has been exhausted already. Okay, this one already stated earlier on. Okay, so for the first point, okay, you probably don't want to emphasize too much on this two. Okay, just touch and go, because earlier on under C part 2 already covered that. Okay, what is detrimental, what is undesirable about youth unemployment. Okay, and therefore, okay, if you want to keep it lean, sure. But when you move on to the adjustment part, you want to illustrate, okay, what is so specific about youth unemployment that how can we correct that? So remember earlier on, okay, one of the major concern is your skill erosion, right? Okay, so to prevent that, you probably need what? Supply side policies. Okay, supply side policies to re-equip the youth with a new skill. Okay, so that they can stay relevant and productive in the years ahead. So the catch is youth. Okay, you want to prepare them with a longer runway. Okay, by intervening early. It sounds like domestic policies, right? The DPM heng longer runway thingy. Okay, I don't digress. I'm running short of time already. Next, okay, you want to notice how the topic sentence is constructed. Okay, so UK's government economic priorities should not be adjusted entirely to growing youth unemployment. And why is that so? Because of another problem that we face, right? So you can actually see that in extract 7, it mentioned that there is imported cost push inflation. So why is this particularly undesirable? Likewise, you can choose the approach like this. Benefit of price stability or cost of inflation. Either or is good enough. You want to emphasize why is this priority important. So in this case, you realize that when there is price stability, it can potentially create greater business certainty, right? Okay, when your price is not volatile, okay, it makes prediction of costs, okay, very predictable. You can attract foreign direct investments into the domestic country. Can help to potentially create jobs, okay, and to reduce youth unemployment. Okay, even better, right? Okay, if FDIs come in. So the next part is talking about the adjustment process. How should the priority be adjusted? Okay, so in this case, okay, the adjustment should be what? Okay, adopting a stronger pound or reducing the foreign reliance on import factors. So we will be learning the concept of what? Okay, we will be learning the concept of exchange rate, especially exchange rate policy. So I just want to make a mental note down here. Okay, with the exception of Singapore, none of the other countries practice exchange rate targeting. So please do not state that UK should target its exchange rate or adopt exchange rate targeting here. So when we meant stronger pound here, there is actually a hidden meaning. Okay, so I will probably take some time to expand on this. Okay, so for those who have learned monetary policy before, okay, you do realize that UK targets interest rate. Okay, so we are specifically concerned about how we can relate interest rate to exchange rate here. Okay, so today I'm not going to cover the entire concept, I'm just going to touch and go. So the correct concept, if you want to expand this point in full, is to conduct contractionary monetary policy. This will lead to a higher interest rate, a higher rate of return on domestic assets. Okay, and this will lead to higher demand for domestic currency, and this will result in appreciation. Okay, so this is the correct channel. Okay, so don't go straight to targeting exchange rate. Okay, UK doesn't do that. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, just copy first. So the last part is pertaining to what we see in the extract. You must use that. So you can actually see that your priorities for youth unemployment, okay, shouldn't be a concern or should not be adjusted. Okay, it should be adjusted for something else instead, okay, such as worsening of your budget position. So you want to emphasize on one cause of worsening budget position, or one benefit of improving budget position. So it's actually stated in the extract already. Okay, the cause of worsening budget position means that you are constrained, for the next down cycle. You're not able to spend. Whereas if you exercise fiscal prudency right now, the next time when there is an adverse shock, you can spend. Okay, it's just looking at the flip side of the same coin. So the second part is, how can we exercise fiscal discipline? How can we improve our budget position? So the concept here that we'll be using here is fiscal austerity. Okay, so I want you all to make a note. Fiscal austerity and contractionary fiscal policy, they are not the same. They are not the same. Okay, they are similar but not the same. So when I mean that they are not the same, the objective is different. Fiscal austerity, we are looking at lowering a debt level. Okay, we are looking at building a stronger fiscal position, by repaying your debt. As for contractionary fiscal policy, we are concerned about cooling the economy, and alleviating your demand side pressures, especially demand pull inflation. So you realize that the objective is clearly different. But the means are the same though. The means are the same. Okay, so cutting of government spending and raising of taxation. It's just that the end goal is different. Are you guys following me? Don't get these two mixed up. Till now, I still have students texting me, Mr. Teo, what's the difference between this? Okay, so now I tell you in lesson 24, yes, this is the key difference. Don't ask me. Okay, just joking. Okay, so to quickly wrap up, Mr. Teo's favorite for priority question. Whenever we want to build a stand, evaluation for if the question is testing you on multiple goals, Okay, listen carefully. One of the easiest stand that you should build is what? Okay, it depends on what is the biggest problem that UK is facing, right? So we have so many problems, but what should we do? Okay, we should first of all evaluate what is the biggest problem first. Okay, before allocate resources to target that. Make sense? And next, okay, every goal that we choose to fix will incur a trade-off. So for instance, if we choose to balance your budget, okay, set aside for rainy days, then in that case, what will happen? Contractionary effect, right? What happens when there's a contractionary effect? Will this improve or worsen youth unemployment? The unintended consequence, right? So once you decide on a goal, make sure you are acceptable of the trade-off. Right? So you have to you can necessitate that you can mention that okay, trade-off is necessitated. Okay, so one more thing that you may want to consider, okay, which is also quite useful, is the magnitude. Okay, so you can actually see that the magnitude of your budget cuts is also going to play a part, okay, on how severe the trade-off is incurred. So if you cut 1 billion spending as compared to 1 trillion spending, there's a lot of zeros, at least 3 or 4 zeros missing, right? Okay, so which one is going to be more severe? In that case, you cut 1 trillion, you're going to severely worsen the other goal. So you have to find a middle point. Okay, or what are the trade-offs that you are happy to incur? So having said that, okay, this question on hindsight is not that difficult. Okay, it just requires you to use the correct framework. Especially the last question, it is kind of tricky. Just break down the question into 2 parts. Okay, and you should be good to go. Alright, so sorry for taking out so much time. I will stop recording.